Hi, I'm Lindsay Evans and I'm a garden designer. When I'm not designing gardens, you'll find me out on my allotment or in my garden looking after my homegrown vegetables and my flowers. If you have a very small garden, it doesn't mean it can't be made beautiful and functional. Here are some tips on how to trick the eye so that a very small garden appears bigger and more interesting. You can try creating a false doorway. Fix a gate to a boundary wall or fence. Even if it leads nowhere, it will give the impression there is something beyond it. Try using an old wrought iron gate with a mirror behind it and a fringe of climbers to blur the edges. Use contrasting colours. A pale wall with a door-sized rectangle painted in a darker colour, framed by some climbers and planted pots, will look like a passageway. You can use contrasting flower and foliage colours as well to add the illusion of extra depth to a garden. You can try creating a false perspective. This can be achieved in several ways, for example, using diminishing sized pots, by which I mean larger pots closer to the house, gradually getting smaller as they go nearer the garden boundaries. Or you can use a path which is wider by the house closer to the house and then gets narrower as it approaches the boundary. Another great trick for making a small garden more interesting and appear larger is to combine hard and soft elements. For example, terminate a pergola or pathway at a garden boundary, plant the boundary with evergreen climbers and the base of the path or pergola with evergreen shrubs. This blurs the edges of the garden and gives the impression of greater space. You're probably familiar with the use of trompe l'oeil in the house. It literally means a trick of the eye. These are also used in the garden as well. They're usually a notional view into a landscape beyond the garden, and these can give a quirky extra dimension to the garden. If done well, they can make a real statement. If in doubt, keep it simple. Paint a faint doorway and surround it with living evergreen planting and climbers. Level changes work really well in a small garden to make it much more interesting. So use level changes like steps, raised beds, a raised pool to create interest and add extra depth. It gives the garden an extra dimension. The eye will stop on the level changes and not be drawn so immediately to the garden boundaries. Wooden structures are also a great addition to a small garden. They enable vertical planting, give height and can help create the impression of a more spacious garden. A heavily planted pergola placed against a boundary wall prevents the eye stopping on the garden boundary and blurs the edges of the garden, suggesting extra space beyond. An archway part the way down the path suggests another area of the garden. Use strong shapes in the design. Avoid fussy lines and stick to strong geometric shapes to focus the eye inside the garden. You don't want to be looking beyond the boundaries. You want to be firmly focused inside the garden. So those are some of my tips for designing a beautiful small garden.